Mic's muted. There we go. Hello. Welcome back to another stream. I'm Ali Chance. Good to see you in a humorous mood, Plinka. But you are right. We will be reading Arabian Nights. Because it's a long book. We have made very unremarkable dent on this tome. Can't even be called a book, it's gigantic. But we are going to remain undaunted and continue on reading the stories, because it is rather entertaining the way it goes through its themes and multiple layers of storytelling within storytelling. There has to be a name for that, but I don't know it. Still working on the whole mic arm. I've never used one of these before. I've sparingly used a microphone before, so I'm out of my depth on both of those fronts, and learning as I go. But we kind of found a realm of how loud we want to talk with it, and trying not to hunch because it's not good for me, and it also makes for the picture of the stream to not look so enjoyable, makes it less likely to be clicked on. I assume similar to how I have the lights in the back as an attraction. However, with the mic arm here, hello, I'm doing well. With the mic arm here, the rice cooker kind of gets covered up, so we may have to move it, but for now it's fine as it is. We found out that we usually need to look up words while we're reading, so we are probably going to have a notepad next to us so we can write them down and not interrupt the reading, at least in the middle of the story, or find a good paragraph to stop at and then look up the words, because doing it right after I find it, I think, disrupts the flow somewhat. Yeah, nothing much to report on since Wednesday. I need to return some books to the library, but other than that, not too much in the way of issues. Hope that the volume is at a good level. To the new person that just hopped in, hi, I'm Hallie. We are going to be reading the Arabian Nights, or 1001 Nights, depending on the way it's translated. And we tend to end on a poem of John Keats when we're finishing up the stream. We might do a few more, depending on how we feel. Well, I'm glad the audio is good. I'm glad I'm speaking at a range that the microphone can pick it up. I'm hoping that the ambient noise in the background is soothing enough for anyone who pops in and wants to use it as a study background or really enjoys the stories. The spot we left off was the second calendar going over his tale of how he became a calendar. A calendar is a man of Sufic denomination. He's a wandering beggar, essentially. But they have a very distinct look of a shaved beard, shaved eyebrows. And these three calendars that are in the story all have one right eye that's blind. They all happen from different reasons. The first one, he was branded. Why was he branded? I can't forget this so quickly. Was he the one that escaped from he was the one that escaped from the vizier? Or is that the last one? Oh gosh. How weak my memory is. I think he was the one that escaped. The other one was sent on an envoy to an Indian king and was promptly raided by bandits, and he's been living in a forest town for a year. Found an underground princess who was trapped by a genie. And we haven't gotten to how he got the scar on his eye, but we are at a point where he's now telling a story to the genie. So as to barter for his life. It seems a very common theme is relaying a tale to a genie so that they don't kill. It has happened now 3 times within 1001 Nights, and we are only 3 tales in, so 3 for 3 as it goes. I'm wondering if Shahrazad's doing it on purpose, maybe to draw a parallel between Shahryar, her captor, and the genies, men of, or beings of extreme power that often abuse humans because of it, through some idea of wrong or just a different moral system, because genies are prevalent creatures in Muslim mythology or Arabian mythology that bled into Quranic mythology, but instead of being genies, they're jinn, and they're just a creature that lives alongside human that are capable of going to heaven or hell depending on their behavior. But anyway, the history of the envious man and of him who was envied. In a town of some importance, there were 2 men who lived next door to each other. One of them was so manifestly envious of the other that the latter resolved to change his abode and go and reside at some distance from him. He supposed that nearness of residence alone was the cause of his neighbor's animosity, and perceived that although he was continuously doing his envious neighbor some friendly office, that he was not the less hated. He therefore sold his house and the small estate attached to it, and went to the capital of the kingdom, which was at no great distance, and bought a small piece of ground about half a league from the town, on which there stood a very convenient dwelling. He had also a good garden, and a court of moderate size, in which there was a deep cistern that was not now used. The good man, having made this purchase, put on the habit of a dervis. We're already at a word we don't know, so I don't have a pen and paper ready, I think. I have a book right there. And I know there's a pen nearby. It's in my pocket. That or the viewer didn't last long. I guess reading's not very popular on Twitch. I kind of knew that going in, but it's always worth a try. And thankfully there's a few people who find it interesting. So it goes. Dervis. Hideous. I forgot the other word we looked up last time. Whatever it be. I'm not quite sure how long the stream is going to go today either. It is a Friday. I wanted to start a little bit earlier because I can manage it. Because my schedule is different on Fridays. But my stamina for streaming is still relatively low, so I think 4 hours is probably the max. And if we get there, then good, and if we don't, then maybe next Friday. Yeah. We may start mixing it up and not just reading Arabian Nights if we find another book that is a wealth of knowledge and is something we can read in the public domain. I'm gonna see if I can pick up the Odyssey, the Iliad, those kinds of books, because those are other epic tales from different parts of the world, but they go over, giant moral epics and just a wealth of literary knowledge inside of them. But I'm excited to be reading this one in particular because it comes from such a different culture and a different place that it's interesting how it's dressed, and seeing how similar the morals still can be. It's just the descriptions and the things that are considered exotic and powerful, like marble and ebony wood and gold and rubies. The culture doesn't like the finer things. But anyway, Dervis. We're gonna have to look that one up, and we're gonna have to get in the habit of not interrupting the actual reading while we do it. Let's see. One, two, three. The good man, having made this purchase, put on the habit of a dervis in order to pass his life in peace, and arranged many cells in his house, where he soon established a small community of dervises. The report of his virtue was soon generally spread abroad, and failed not to attract the attention and visits of great numbers of the principal inhabitants, as well as of the common people. At length he was honored and respected by almost everyone. Men came from a great distance to request him to offer up prayers for them, and all who remained in retirement with him. Published abroad the report of the blessings they thought they received heaven through his means. The great reputation of this man at length reached the town from whence he had come, and the envious man, of hearing it, was so vexed that he left his house and all his affairs with the determination to go and destroy his former neighbor. For this purpose, he went to the hospital of dervises, whose charitable founder received him with every possible mark of friendship. The envious man told him that he had come with the express design of communicating an affair of great importance to him, but that he must speak to him in private. In short, said he, in order that no one may hear us, let us, I pray you, walk in your court, and when night comes, order all the dervises to their cells. The chief of dervises did as he was requested. When the envious man found himself alone with the good dervis, he began to relate to him whatever came into his thoughts, while they walked through one end of the court to the other, till observing they were just at the edge of the well, and he gave him a push and thrust him into it. and there was no one by to witness this wicked act. Then he went away directly to the gate of the house, and passing out unseen, returned home well satisfied with his journey, and highly pleased to think that the object of his envy was no more. In this idea, however, he was deceived. It was a most fortunate thing for the dervis that this well inhabited by fairies and genii who were ready to assist him. They caught and supported him in their arms in such a way that he received not the least injury. He naturally supposed there was something very extraordinary in his having sustained without injury a fall that would under ordinary circumstances have cost him his life. And yet he could not perceive anything to account for his safety. He soon, however, heard a voice say, "Do you know anything of this man, to whom we have been so serviceable?" And some other voice answered, "No." And the first then resumed, "I will tell you, this man, with the most charitable and benevolent intentions in the world, left the town where he lived, and came to settle in this place, with the hope of being able to cure one of his neighbors of the envy and hatred the latter had conceived against him. He soon became so universally esteemed that the envious man could not endure the thought, and determined therefore to put an end to his late neighbor's existence. This design he would have executed had it not been for the assistance we afforded this good man, whose reputation is so great that the Sultan, who resides in the neighboring town, was coming to visit him tomorrow in order to recommend the princess, his daughter, to the holy dervis." Another voice asked what occasion the princess had for the prayers of the dervis, and the first answered, "Are you ignorant, then, that she was possessed by the power of the genie Maimoun, and the son of Dimdim, who has fallen in love with her? But I know how this good dervis can cure her. The thing is by no means difficult, as you shall hear. In his hospital there is a black cat, which has a white spot at the end of her tail about the size of a small coin. Let him only pull out 7 hairs from the white spot and burn them, and then with the smoke of the perfume the head of the princess. The moment she feels the smoke, she will be so thoroughly... I'm getting tongue-tied a lot. I'm not a fan of it. The amount she feels the smoke, she will be so thoroughly cured and free from Maimoun, the son of Dimdim, that he will never again be able to come near her." The chief of the dervises did not lose a single syllable of this conversation between the fairies and genii, who afterwards remained silent the whole night. The next morning, as soon as the day began to break, and the different objects became visible, the dervis perceived, as well as the well was decayed in many places, that he could climb out without any difficulty. The other dervises who were seeking for him were delighted at his appearance. He related to them in a few words the cunning and wicked attempt of the guest he had entertained the day before, and then retired to his cell. Presently the black cat, which had been mentioned in the discourse of the fairies and genii, came to him to be taken notice of as usual. He took it up, and plucked out the 7 hairs from the white spot of its tail. These he put aside to use whenever he should have occasion for them. The sun had not long risen above the horizon when the Sultan, who wished to neglect no means which he thought gave any chance of curing the princess, arrived at the gate. He ordered his guards to wait, and went in accompanied by the principal officers. The dervises received him with the greatest respect. This is an unfortunate instance where I chose not to look up a word, but it's being used so frequently that I think I have to. We're going to look it up. Apparently it doesn't exist. but dervish is a word. A member of a Muslim religious order noted for devotional exercises. One that whirls or dances with her as with abandonment of a dervish. Okay, so they're kind of like calendars. Oh wait, we know this word. We looked up this word yesterday because it's inside of the reference of a calendar. Of wandering mendicant dervishes. Yes, yes. We know this word. We looked it up yesterday. Ah. Fool I am. Oh. Ooh. One, two, three, 1, 2, 3. The dervishes received him with the greatest respect. The Sultan directly took the chief aside and said to him, "Worthy Sheik, you are perhaps already acquainted with the cause of my visit." The dervish answered modestly, "My lord, if I do not deceive myself, it is the illness of the princess that has been the occasion of my meeting you, in honor of which I am unworthy." "You are right," replied the Sultan, "and you will restore almost my life to me if, by means of your prayers, I obtain the recovery of my daughter's health." "If your majesty," answered the worthy man, "will have the goodness to suffer the princess to come here, I flatter myself that, with the help and favor of God, she shall return in perfect health." The prince, rejoiced at the idea of his daughter's cure, immediately sent for the princess, who soon appeared, accompanied by a numerous train of female slaves and eunuchs, and veiled in such a manner that her face could not be seen. The chief of the dervishes made the slaves hold a shovel over the head of the princess, and as soon as he threw the 7 white hairs upon some burning coals, which by his direction had been brought in the shovel, the genie Maimoun, the son of Dimdim, uttered a violent scream, and left the princess quite at liberty. The first thing she did was put her hand to the veil which covered her face, and to lift it to see where she was. "Where am I?" she cried. "Who has brought me here?" At these words, the Sultan could not conceal his joy. He embraced his daughter. He kissed her eyes, and then took the hand of his dervish and kissed it. Do ye judge, said he to the officers. "What return does he not deserve, who has cured my daughter?" They all answered that he was worthy of her hand. "This is the very reward I was meditating for him," the Sultan cried, "and from this moment I proclaim him my son-in-law." I think the issue is just trying to get comfortable with holding this large of a book. I think we're going to read smaller ones, because this is ridiculous. Soon after this, the vizier died, and the sultan immediately advanced the dervish to the vacant post. And when the sultan himself soon afterwards died without any male issue, this excellent man was proclaimed his successor by the general voice of the different religious and military orders. One day, as he was walking with his courtiers, the good dervish, who was thus raised to the throne of his father-in-law, observed the envious man among the crowd in the road. He called one of the viziers who accompanied him, telling him in a whisper to bring that man whom he pointed out, and to be sure not to alarm him. The vizier obeyed, and when the envious man was in the presence of the sultan, the latter addressed him in these words: "I am very happy, my friend, to see you. Go directly," said he, speaking to an officer, "and count out from my treasury 1,000 pieces of gold. Nay more, deliver him 20 bales of the most valuable merchandise my magazines contain, and let sufficient guard escort him home." After having given the officer this commission, he dismissed the envious man and continued his walk. When I had told this history to the genie who had assassinated the princess, When I had told this history to the genie who had assassinated the princess of the Isle of Ebony, I applied the moral to myself. "O genie," I said, "you may observe how this benevolent monarch acted towards the envious man, and was not only ready to forget that he had attempted his life, but even sent him back laden with the benefits I have mentioned. In short, I employed all my eloquence to persuade him to imitate so excellent an example and to pardon me, but I found it impossible to alter his resolution. 'All that I can do for you,' he said, 'is spare your life. Yet do not flatter yourself that I shall suffer you to depart safe and well. I must at least make you feel what I can do by my enchantments.' At these words, he violently seized me, carrying me through a vaulted roof of the subterranean palace, which opened at his approach. He soared up with me so high that the earth appeared to me only like a small white cloud. From this height he again descended as quick as lightning, and alighted on the top of a mountain. On this spot he took up a handful of earth, and pronouncing, or rather muttering certain words of which I could not understand the meaning, threw it over me. 'Quit the figure of man,' he cried, 'and assume that of an ape.' He then immediately disappeared, and I remained quite alone, changed into an ape, overwhelmed with grief in an unknown country, and ignorant whether I was near the domains of the king my father. I descended the mountain and came to a flat, level region, the extremity of which I do not reach till I had traveled a month. At length I arrived at the sea-coast. There was at this time a profound calm, and I perceived a vessel about half a league from the shore. Taking advantage of this fortunate circumstance, I broke off a large branch from the tree, and dragged it on the beach. I then got astride it with a stick in each hand to serve for oars. In this manner I rowed myself along towards the vessel, and when I was sufficiently near to be seen, I presented a most extraordinary sight to the sailors and passengers who were upon deck. They looked at me with admiration and astonishment. In due time I got alongside, and taking hold of a rope I climbed up to the deck, but I could not speak. I found myself in the greatest embarrassment. In fact, the danger I now ran was not less imminent than I had before I experienced when I was in the power of the genie. The merchants who were on board were both scrupulous and superstitious, and they thought that I should be the cause of some misfortune to them during their voyage if they received me. "I will kill him," cried one, "with a blow of this handspike." "Let me shoot an arrow through his body," exclaimed another. "And then let us throw his body into the sea," said the third. They would not have failed to execute their different threats if I had not run to the captain and thrown myself at his feet. In this supplicating posture I laid hold of the hem of his garment, and he was so struck with this action, as well as with the tears that fell from my eyes, that he took me under his protection, declaring that if anyone did me the slightest injury, he would make him repent it. He even caressed and encouraged me. In spite of the loss of my speech, I showed him by means of signs how much I was obliged to him. I still don't understand emojis. Am I making faces at the camera? My mind doesn't seem to be quite in it today. I want to be, though. I want to read this. I seem mildly distracted. I have some tests I'm doing. Just to see if I can still do the chemistry and physics classes that I did in college. It's somewhat difficult restudying it all. Oh, we could read. We could always read textbooks. We could always read college textbooks. And that people think this is hard. Oh, sweet. Although I'm fairly certain those have a copyright on them, but it'd be funny. It'd be funny. There's got to be a way that there's got to be a way to do it. There's ways around copyrights. If it's transformed, it's not read verbatim. Like, I guess maybe. No, but then it's just reading notes. That's not the same. And I'm really just thinking about the textbooks. Because they're far too new to not be. Nah, there's not a single college textbook that's public domain. The wind which succeeded this calm was not a strong one, but it was favorable. It did not change for 50 days, and it carried us safely into the harbor of a large city, commercial, well-built and populous. Here we cast anchor. This cast was of considerable importance, as it was the capital of a powerful kingdom. Our vessel was immediately surrounded by a multitude of boats, filled with people who came to either congratulate their friends on their arrival, or to get tidings from them as to see what they had seen in the country they had come from, while some came for the mere curiosity to see a ship which had arrived from a distance. Among the rest, some officers stepped on board and desired in the name of the Sultan to speak to the merchants who were with us. The Sultan, our sovereign, said one of them to the merchants, who immediately appeared, has charged us to express to you the pleasure your arrival gives him, and entreats each of you to take the trouble of writing a few lines upon this roll of paper. That you may understand his motive for this, I must inform you. He had a first vizier who, besides showing great ability in the management of affairs, wrote in the most perfect style. This minister died a few days since. The Sultan is very much afflicted at his loss, and he values proficiency in writing beyond everything. He has taken a solemn oath to appoint as his vizier that person who shall write as well as the last vizier did. Many have presented specimens of their abilities, but he has not yet found anyone throughout the empire whom he has thought worthy to occupy the vizier's place. Each one of those merchants who thought they could write well enough to aspire to this high dignity wrote whatever they thought proper. When they had done, I advanced and took a paper from the hands of him who held it. Everybody, and particularly the merchants who had written, cried out in alarm, thinking that I meant either to destroy it or throw it into the water. But they were soon undeceived when they saw me hold the paper very properly and make a sign that I also wished to write in my turn. Their fears were now changed to astonishment, yet as they had never seen an ape that could write, and as they could not believe I was more skillful than other animals of my species, they wished to take a roll from my hands. But the captain still continued to take my part. "Suffer him to try," he said. "Let him write. If he only blots the paper, I promise you I will instantly punish him. But if on the contrary he writes well, as I hope he will, for I've never seen any ape more clever and ingenious, nor one who seems so well to understand everything, I declare that I will adopt him as my son." I once had a son who did not possess half so much ability as I find in this ape. What a statement. As they have now all ceased to oppose my design, I took the pen and did not leave off writing till I had given an example of 6 different sorts of characters used in Arabia. Each specimen contained either a distich or an impromptu stanza of 4 lines in praise of the Sultan. I don't know how to write down a word or look it up without interrupting the story, but this is another one. What's a distich? Some kind of poetic meter, I assume. Oh, note on, well, it might do to vary upstreams. I got a keyboard that will be coming next week, so we can finally do some music theory, and that will be very cacophonic, discordian noise, because I do not know how to play piano, and we are going to be learning here. And I know very little about music theory, so I'll be learning that here. And there will be many wrong notes, and not a lot of actually good sounding things, I assume. I don't think I'm some hidden genius or prodigy when it comes to music. I played the trumpet in the past. I was not great at it. But I want to know how to play instruments, so I've got to learn how to read music first. But writing not only excelled that of the merchants, but I dare say they had never seen any so beautiful in that whole country. When I had finished, the officers took the roll and carried it to the Sultan. The monarch paid no attention to any of the specimens of writing except mine, which pleased him so much that he said to the officers, "Take the finest and most richly caparisoned horse from my stable, and the most magnificent robe of brocade you can find, to adorn the person of him who has written these 6 varieties of character, and bring him to me." At this order of the Sultan's, the officers could not forbear laughing. His conduct irritated him so much that he would have punished them, had they not said, "We entreat your majesty to pardon us. These words were not written by a man, but by an ape." "What did you say?" cried the Sultan. "Are not these wonderful specimens of writing from the hand of man?" "No, sire," answered one of the officers. "We assure your majesty that we saw an ape write them." This matter appeared so wonderful to the Sultan that he felt very desirous of seeing me. "Do as I command you," said he to the officer, "and hasten to bring me this extraordinary ape." The officers returned to the vessel and showed their order to the captain, who said the Sultan should be obeyed. They immediately dressed me in a robe of very rich brocade and carried me on ashore, where they set me on a horse and brought me to the Sultan, who was waiting in his palace for me, with a considerable number of people. Something about this wall being here, I think, might be an issue. I have to move my desk away from it. I lost my spot. Where was I? Hello to the person just tuning in. I'm Hallie. We are reading The Arabian Nights, or 1001 Nights, depending on the way it's translated. Now we are on the second calendar of the visitors of the three ladies and the porter, the doorman. They're going over their tales of life in a way to... and they left. That's fine. Nobody likes books anymore. Is that supposed to be a sad face? I don't quite understand. It looks like a robot. The viewer count for small numbers is not very accurate. Oh. Really? Marichin. Oh, yes. Marichin's a great brand. It's one I don't mind putting on myself. It's a food that got me through college, so I don't mind having a hat with it. I think I have a shirt that has it as well. I wonder why the viewer count for small numbers isn't accurate. It seems like it would be easier to count when there's fewer people coming in and out. I don't know. I don't know how to code things. I don't know what codes Twitch runs on. That's not my area of expertise at all. Where were we? Yeah. Don't know much about it. Well, that's fine. They immediately dressed me in a robe of very rich brocade and carried me on the shore, where they set me on a horse and brought me to the Sultan, who was waiting in this palace for me with a considerable number of people belonging to the court, whom he had assembled to do me honor. The march commenced, while the gate, the streets, public buildings, windows, and terraces of palace and houses were filled with an immense number of persons, of every age and sex, whom curiosity had drawn together from all quarters of the town to see me. For the report had got abroad in an instant that the Sultan had chosen an ape for his Grand Vizier. After having afforded a very uncommon sight to all these people, who ceased not to express their surprise by loud and repeated shouts, I arrived at the palace. I found the prince seated on his throne amidst the nobles of his court. I made him 3 low bows, and at the last reverence I prostrated myself and kissed the earth by his feet. I then rose and seated myself exactly like an ape. None of the assembly could withhold their admiration, nor did they comprehend how it was possible for an ape to be so well acquainted with the form and respect attached to sovereigns. Nor was the Sultan less astonished than the courtiers. The whole ceremony of audience would have been complete if I had only been able to add speech to my actions, but apes never speak, and the advantage of having once been a man could not in that respect assist me. The Sultan dismissed the courtiers. Sometimes in other streams I'm talking in the chat and the viewer count is 0. Oh. That's unfortunate. I mean, I guess they know that at least one person is there. Whenever you tune in the Plinka, it changes to 1. I can tell when you arrive. So thankfully, at least I can tell the difference between 0 and 1 on my stream. I wonder if that's a network thing, or if that's across the board. It's unfortunate if it's because then people don't know if there's anyone there. I'm glad at least that I know that. Like, obviously I'd know because you tend to write in chat a lot, but I'm glad that actually shows when there is an arrival. Maybe. Sounds like maybe not. Sometimes it'll go up and then it'll go back down. But I mean, I figure that's just people popping in because they're curious, and then when they figure out that it's not something that they're interested in, they just leave. I'm pretty aware of the fact that this is not going to be a very popular subject for a lot of people. And we'll find a way to make it more interesting, I think, so that people can retain it. I know that Twitch is kind of made for interaction, a mild amount, but it's just odd considering how many people game. You know, gaming is something that a lot of people associate with focus. I guess it's its own beast. I guess reading is something you associate with focus as well. It's hard to go back and forth through the story without interrupting it. And I've done it a lot this time, and there isn't a whole lot of paragraphs in this story, so I keep losing my spot. Where were we? Babes never speak, and the addition of not respect assists me. The Sultan dismissed the courtiers, and there remained with him only the chief of his eunuchs, a little slave, and myself. He went from the hall of audience into his own apartment, where he ordered a repast to be served up. While he was at the table, he made me a sign to come and eat with him. As a mark of my obedience, I got up, kissed the ground, and then seated myself at the table. I ate, however, with much modesty and moderation. Before the table was cleared, I perceived a writing desk, and requested by signs that it be brought to me. As soon as I had it, I wrote upon a large peach some lines of my own composition, setting forth my gratitude to the Sultan. His astonishment at reading them, after I presented the peach to him, was greater than ever. When the dishes were taken away, the servants brought a particular sort of wine, of which he desired them to give me a glass. I drank it, and then wrote some fresh verses, which explained the state in which I now found myself after my numerous sufferings. The Sultan, having read this also, exclaimed, "A man who could be capable of acting thus would be one of the greatest men that ever lived." The prince then ordered a chessboard to be brought and asked me again by sign if I could play, and would engage with him. I kissed the ground, and putting my hand on my head, I showed him I was ready to receive that honor. He won the first game, but the second and third ended in my favor. Perceiving that this somewhat disconcerted him, I wrote a stanza to amuse him, and presented it to him. The verse set forth how two powerful armed bodies fought the whole day with the greatest honor, but made peace in the evening, and passed the night together very tranquilly upon the field of battle. All these circumstances appearing to the Sultan greatly to exceed what he had ever seen or heard of the address and ingenuity of apes, he wished to have more witnesses of these prodigies. He had a daughter, who was called the Queen of Beauty, therefore desired the chief of eunuchs to bring her. "Go," he said to that officer, "and bring your lady here. I wish her to partake of the pleasure I enjoy." The chief of eunuchs went, and brought back the princess with him. When she entered, her face was uncovered. She was no sooner fairly within the apartment, that she instantly drew her veil about her, and said to the Sultan, Your Majesty must have forgotten yourself. I am surprised that you order me to appear before men. What is this, daughter? Answered the Sultan. It seems that you are the person who has forgotten herself. There is no one here but the little slave, the eunuch, and myself. We were always at liberty to see your face. Why then do you hide your face in your veil and assert that I have done wrong in ordering you to come here? Sir, replied the princess, your Majesty will be convinced I am not mistaken. The ape, or rather the creature which you see there in that form, is not an ape, but a young prince, the son of a great king. He has been changed into shape of an ape by enchantment. A genie, the son of the daughter of Eblis, has been guilty of this malicious action after he had cruelly killed the princess of the Isle of Ebony, daughter of the king Epidamaris. The Sultan was astonished at this speech, and turning to me asked, but not now by signs, whether what his daughter said was true. As I could not speak, I put my hand upon my head to show that she had spoken the truth. How came you to know, daughter, said the king, that the prince had been transformed into an ape by means of enchantment? Sir, replied the princess, your Majesty may recollect that when I was a child I had an old woman as one of my attendants. She was very well skilled in magic, and she taught me 70 rules of that science, by virtue of which I could instantly cause your capital to be transported in the middle of the ocean, nay, beyond Mount Caucasus. By means of this science, I know all persons who have been enchanted. The moment I behold them, not only who they are, but by whom also they were enchanted. Be not therefore surprised that I have at first sight discovered this prince, in spite of the charm which prevented him from appearing in your eyes, what he really is. My dear daughter, exclaimed the Sultan, I did not think you were so skillful. Sir, added the princess, these things are curious and worthy of being studied, but I do not think it becomes me to boast of my knowledge, since this is the case, replied the Sultan. You can dissolve the enchantment under which the prince suffers. I can, said she, and restore him to his own form. Do so, then, said the Sultan. You could not do me a greater favor, as I wish to have him for my Grand Vizier, and bestow you upon him for a wife. I am ready, sir, answered the princess, to obey you in all things you may please to command. The Queen of Beauty then went to her apartment and returned with a knife, which had some Hebrew characters engraved upon the blade. She desired the Sultan, the chief of eunuchs, the little slave, and myself to go down into a secret court of the palace, and then leaving us under a gallery which surrounded the court, she went into the middle of it, where she described a large circle, and traced several words, both in ancient Arabic characters, and in those which are called the characters of Cleopatra. I wonder what that's supposed to mean. Hieroglyphics or Coptic? I think Coptic. It has its own alphabet, but I don't know the time frame when it became a language, or a written language at least. I guess I don't need to know that, I just need to know when Cleopatra was ruling and what language she used. I think it was likely Coptic, because that wasn't ancient. Ancient Egypt used hieroglyphics, but Cleopatra was around in the same period as Caesar. I don't know my old history very well. When she had done this, 1, 2, 1, 2. Yeah, good distance. When she had done this and prepared the circle as she required it to be, she went and placed herself in the midst of it, where she began her incantations and repeated several verses from the Quran. Coptic 3rd, 4th century. Wikipedia. Yeah, that makes sense. But when was Cleopatra a figure in history? I think she was... When was Caesar a figure in history? He was like very early BC, right? Like almost at the turn of the birth of Christ. Because that's when Cleopatra was around as well. Well, that's an unfortunate year. Let's see, what language did she use? Ptolemaic dynasty of Egypt. The Ptolemaic kingdom. Oh, common languages were Greek and Egyptian. So, that's not hieroglyphs. What is this? Hieratic? Oh wow, there's a bunch of different languages. What is this? This is a whole rabbit hole I just did not know existed. There's all kinds of like variations. It's like the languages that came before Latin. Etruscan's one of them. It's just cool knowing that all those things exist. I mean, obviously that exists for other places. Just I had no idea about I had no idea we knew anything about them. That's really neat. Alright, we've been quiet long enough. I was just reading a little bit into the Coptic Demotic rabbit hole, but off topic. Language of Cleopatra, either Greek or hieroglyphic Egyptian. Those were the languages available at the time. I'm assuming ancient Greek. Hieroglyphics weren't very well understood in this time period, but ancient Greek was not a far off language, at least in terms of when Arabian Nights was likely codified, which was during the Islamic Golden Age. There was an extreme amount of translation of ancient Greek and Latin texts, and that's where most of the Western canon actually went during the Dark Ages of Europe, was to Arabia, the Umayyad Empire. And they proceeded to expand upon it to make jumps, increases, discoveries in science, anatomy, engineering, when Europe was just busy goofing off with the really bad drawings we now see of it. I think that's Middle Ages, but yeah, just Crusades and Byzantine Empire. A lot of goofy things that didn't amount to much. Or Byzantine Empire. They were just surrounded on every side by invaders and just empires that were stronger than they were. Just a tragedy unfolding, and I think they only have like one notable piece of literature that was released, and it's like a biography on the Byzantine Empire. I don't remember the name of it. We'll eventually have to read that, I think, because the Byzantine Empire is just such a funny anomaly in existence in human history, because it was just the empire that refused to die for the longest time, and they just slowly got bit by bit taken over by the surrounding empires until eventually they turned into the Ottoman Empire, obviously under different management, but their capital was in the same place. Anyway, another tangent. When she had done this and prepared the circle as she required it to be, she went and placed herself in the midst of it, and she began her incantations and repeated several verses from the Quran. History is fascinating, isn't it? By degrees the air was darkened as if night was coming on, and the whole world seemed vanishing. We were seized with the greatest fear, and this was the more increased when we saw the genie, the son of the daughter of Iblis, suddenly appear in the shape of a huge, terrible lion. So soon as the princess perceived this monster, she said to it, "Dog, how darest thou, instead of cringing before me, present thyself under this horrible form, thinking to alarm me?" "And how darest thou," replied the lion, "break the treaty which we have made and confirmed by a solemn oath, not to injure each other?" "Wretch," cried the princess, "thou art he whom I have to reproach on that account. Thou shalt pay dearly," interrupted the lion, "for the trouble thou hast given me in coming here." And saying this, he opened his dreadful jaws and advanced to devour her. But she, being on her guard, sprang back, and had just time to pluck out a hair from her head, and pronounce 2 or 3 words. She changed it into a sharp scythe, with which she immediately cut the lion in 2 pieces through the middle. That's a wide change from most of the stories we've encountered in Arabian Nights. That's a very anime-esque thing, to pluck a hair and turn it into a weapon with which you can cut a lion in half. Wow, I didn't think that the Arabian Nights would be like this at all. This is quite entertaining. The 2 parts of the lion directly disappeared, and the head only remained. which changed into a large scorpion. The princess then took the form of a serpent and began a fierce combat with the scorpion. I'm sorry, what? Which, finding itself in danger of being defeated, changed into an eagle and flew away. But the serpent then became another eagle, black and more powerful, and went in pursuit of it. We now lost sight of them for some time. Shortly after they had disappeared, the earth opened before us, and a black and white cat appeared. The hairs of this creature stood quite on end, and it mewed and cried in a horrible manner. A black wolf closely followed it, and it gave it no respite. The cat, being hard-pressed, changed into a worm, and finding itself near a pomegranate, which had fallen by accident from a tree that grew upon the bank of a deep but narrow canal, instantly made a hole in the fruit and concealed itself there. The pomegranate at once began to swell and became as large as a gourd, which rose up as high as the gallery and rolled backwards and forward there several times. It then fell down to the bottom of the court and broke into 1,000 pieces. The wolf, in the meantime, transformed itself into a cock, and running to the seeds of the pomegranate, began swallowing them one after the other as fast as possible. When it had eaten all it could see, it came to us with its wings extended, and the crowd, and crowed loudly, as if to inquire of us whether there were any more seeds. There was one lying on the border of the canal, which the cock on returning perceived. He ran towards it as quickly as possible, but at the very instant when his beak was upon it, the seed rolled into the canal and changed into a small fish. The cock then flew into the canal, and changing to a pike, pursued the little fish. They were both 2 hours under water. We knew not what was become of them, when suddenly we heard some terrible cries that made us tremble. Soon after we saw the genie and the princess all on fire. They darted flames against each other with their breath, and at the last came to a close attack. Then the fire increased, and everything about was encompassed with smoke and flame which rose to a great height. We were afraid, and not without reason, that the whole palace would be burnt. But we soon had so much stronger cause for terror, for the genie, having disengaged himself from the princess, came towards the gallery where we stood, and blew his flames all over us. This would have destroyed us if the princess, running to her assistance, had not compelled him by her cries to retreat to a distance and defend himself against her. In spite, however, of all the haste she made, she could not prevent the sultan from having his head singed and his face scorched. The chief of the eunuchs, too, was killed on the spot, and the spark flew into my right eye and blinded me. Both the sultan and I expected to perish when we suddenly heard the cry of "Victory, victory," and the princess immediately appeared to us in her own form, while the genie lay at our feet, reduced to a heap of ashes. The princess approached us, and then immediately asked for a cup of water, which was brought by the young slave whom the fire had not injured. She took it, and after pronouncing some words over it, she threw some water over me, and said, "If thou art an ape by enchantment, change thy form and take that of man which thou hadst before." She had hardly concluded when I again became a man, as I had been before I was changed, except that I had lost one eye. I was preparing to thank the princess, but she did not give me time. Turning to the sultan, her father, she said, "Sire, I have gained the victory over the genie, as your majesty may see, but it is a victory which has cost me dear. I have but a few moments to live, and you will not have the satisfaction of carrying out the marriage you intended. In this dreadful combat the fire has penetrated my body, and I feel that it will soon consume me. This would not have happened if I perceived the last seed of pomegranate when I was in the shape of a cock and had swallowed it as I did the others. The genie had taken that form as a last resource, and on that depended the success of the combat, which would have been fortunate and without danger to me had I perceived my enemy's stratagem. I did not perceive it, and this omission obliged me to have recourse to fire and fight with that powerful weapon between heaven and earth, as you saw me do. In spite of his dreadful power and experience, I convinced him that my knowledge and art were greater than his. I have at length conquered and reduced him to ashes, but I cannot escape the death which I feel approaching." When the princess had finished this account of the battle, the sultan, in a tone which showed how much he was agitated by the recital, answered, You see, my daughter, the state to which your father is reduced. Alas, I am only astonished that I still live. The eunuch, your governor, is dead, and the prince, whom you have delivered from enchantment, has lost an eye. He could say no more, for his tears and sobs stopped his utterance. Both his daughter and myself were extremely affected at his sufferings, and mingled our tears with his. While we were abandoning ourselves to the expression of our sorrow, the princess suddenly exclaimed, "I burn, I inwardly burn." The fire which had been consuming her had at last seized her whole body, and she did not cease to call out, "I burn," till death put an end to her almost insupportable sufferings. The effect of this fire was so extraordinary that in a few minutes she was reduced, like the genie, to a heap of ashes. I need not say how much this dreadful and melancholy sight dismayed and grieved us. I would have rather continued an ape or a dog my whole life than have seen my benefactress perish in such a horrid manner. The Sultan, too, on his part, was beyond measure afflicted. He uttered the most lamentable cries, violently beating his head and breast, till at last, yielding to despair, he fainted, and I feared even his life would fall a sacrifice to his excessive sorrow. The cries of the Sultan brought the eunuchs and officers to assistance, and they found great difficulty in restoring him to consciousness. There was no occasion for either the monarch or myself to give them a very long detail of this adventure to convince them of the propriety of our sorrow. The 2 heaps of ashes, to which the princess and the genie had been reduced, were quite sufficient proof. As the Sultan could scarcely support himself, he was obliged to lean up on 2 officers to get to his apartment. As soon as his knowledge of the late tragical event was spread through the palace and the city, everyone lamented the melancholy fate of the princess, surnamed the Queen of Beauty, and sympathized in the grief of the Sultan. All put on mourning for 7 days and performed many ceremonies. The ashes of the genie they scattered in the wind, but collected of the princess in a costly vase and preserved them. This vase was then deposited in a superb mausoleum, which was erected on the very spot where the ashes had been found. Ashes. The grief which preyed upon the Sultan for the loss of his daughter brought on a disease that confined him to his bed for a whole month. He had not quite recovered from his health when he called me to him and said, "Listen, Prince, and attend to the order which I am going to give you. If you fail to execute it, your life will be the forfeit." I assured him I would obey. Then he proceeded thus: "I have always lived in a state of the greatest happiness, nor had any unfortunate event ever occurred under my rule. Your arrival has destroyed my peace. My daughter is dead, her governor is no more, and I have escaped with my life only by a miracle. You are the cause of all these misfortunes, for which I can find no consolation. These are the reasons which induce me to desire you will leave me unmolested, but go immediately, for if you remain here any longer, it will be the cause of my death also, since I am persuaded your presence is productive only of misfortune. This is all that I have to say to you. Go, and beware how you appear again in my kingdom. If you disobey me, no consideration shall prevent my making you repent it." I wished to speak, but he prevented me by some angry words, and I was obliged to leave his palace. Driven to and fro, rejected and abandoned by everyone, I knew not what was to become of me. Before I left the city, I went to a bath, had my beard and eyebrows shaved, and put on the dress of a calender. And then I began my journey, lamenting less my own miserable condition than the death of the 2 beautiful princesses which I had occasioned. I traveled through many countries without making myself known. At last I resolved to visit Baghdad in hope of being able to present myself to the commander of the faithful, and excite his compassion by the recital of my strange history. I arrived here this evening, and the first person I met was the calender, my brother, who has already related his life. You know, madam, what happens afterward, and how I came to have the honor of being at your house." When the second calender had finished his history, Zobeide, to whom he had addressed himself, said, "You have done well, and I give you leave to go whenever you please." But instead of taking his departure, he entreated her to grant him the same favor she had vouchsafed to the other calender, near whom he took his place. Then the third calender, knowing it was his turn to speak, addressed himself, like the others, to Zobeide, and began his history as follows. The history of the third calender, son of the king. What I am going to relate to you, most honorable lady, is of a very different nature from that of the two stories you have already heard. Each of the two princes who have recited their histories has lost an eye, as it were by the power of destiny, while I have lost mine in consequence of my own fault. I have sought out my misfortune, as you will find, by what I am going to tell. I am called Agib, and I am the son of a king whose name was Kasib. After his death, I took possession of his throne and established my residence in the same city which he made his capital. This city, which is situated on the seacoast, has a remarkably handsome and safe harbor, with an arsenal sufficiently extensive to supply an armament of 150 vessels of war, always lying ready for the service on any occasion, and to equip 50 merchantmen, as many sloops and yachts, for the purposes of amusement and pleasure on the water. My kingdom was composed of many beautiful provinces, and also contained a number of considerable islands, almost all of which were situated within sight of my capital. The first thing I did was to visit the provinces. I then made them arm, had my whole fleet equipped, and went around to all my islands in order to conciliate the affections of my subjects, and to confirm in them their duty and allegiance. After I had been at home some time, I set out again, and these voyages, by giving me some slight knowledge of navigation, infused such a taste for it into my mind that I resolved to go on a voyage of discovery beyond my islands. For this purpose I equipped only 10 ships, and embarking in one of them, we set sail. During 40 days our voyage was prosperous, but on the night of the 41st, the winds became adverse and so violent that we were driven at the mercy of the tempest, and thought we should have been lost. At break of day, however, the storm abated. The clouds dispersed, and the rising sun brought fine weather with it. We now landed on an island, where we remained 2 days to take in provisions. Having done this, we again put to sea. After 10 days' sail, we began to hope to see land, for since the night of the storm, I had altered my intention and determined to return to my kingdom. But I then discovered that my pilot knew not where we were. In fact, on the 10th day, a sailor who was ordered to the masthead for the purpose of scanning the horizon reported that to the right and left he could perceive only the sky and sea, that straight before him he observed a great blackness. At this intelligence, the pilot changed color, and throwing his turban on the deck with one hand, he struck his face with the other and cried out, "Ah, my lord, we are lost. Not one of us can possibly escape the danger which threatens us, and with all my experience, it is not in my power to ensure the safety to any one of you." Speaking thus, he began to weep like one who thought his destruction inevitable, and his despair spread alarm and fear through the whole vessel. I asked him what reason he had for this outburst of grief. "Alas," he answered, "the tempest we have experienced has so driven us from our track that by midday tomorrow we shall find ourselves near yonder dark object, which is a black mountain consisting entirely of a mass of lodestone that will soon attract our fleet on account of the bolts and nails in the ship. Tomorrow, when we shall have come within a certain distance, the power of the lodestone will be so great that all the nails will be drawn out of the keels and attach themselves to the mountain. Our ships will then fall in pieces and sink. It is this property of the lodestone to attract iron, and as its own power increases by this attraction, the mountain towards the sea is entirely covered with nails that belong to an immense number of ships which it has destroyed, and this mass of iron fragments at the same time preserves and augments the virtue of the attraction in the lodestone. This mountain," continued the pilot, "is very steep, and on the summit there is a large dome made of fine bronze, and supported upon columns of the same metal. At the top of the dome there is also a bronze horse, with the figure of a man upon it. The rider's breast is covered by a leaden breastplate, upon which some talismanic characters are engraven, and there is tradition that this statue is the principal cause of the loss of many vessels and men who have been drowned in this place, and that it will never cease from being destructive to all who should have the misfortune to approach it, until it is overthrown." When the pilot finished his speech, He wept anew, and his tears excited the grief of the whole crew. As for myself, I did not doubt that I was now approaching the end of my days. Every man began to think of his own preservation and try every possible means to save himself, and during this period of uncertainty we all agreed to make the survivors, if any should be saved, the heirs of the rest. I knew there was magical elements that were going to be present in Arabian Nights, but these last two stories in particular have been extremely different than the ones preceding, which were there's a genie who is extremely powerful, and there is but men and enchantresses who can do mild things. But that last one, the battle with the genie, was just like, whoa, that's extremely different. In this sailing voyage to a magnetic island, very different idea. I can't recall any stories I've read where that was a theme that was placed inside of it. The closest I can think of is the Odyssey, which is largely a naval escapade, but just Skyla and Charybdis or the Sirens. There's magical creatures, but this one, it's specifically a mountain that is their enemy, just a magnetic island. And what a way to describe, the terrors are at sea. It's not something you can fight because it's just a force that's always emanating, magnetism. You can't fight it. It's going to take the iron from your ship and tear it apart that way. Oh. Man, how dreadful. That's way worse than Skyla and Charybdis, where it's just a monster that creates a whirlpool and a monster that'll eat 6 of your crew. It's even that has an answer to it, because you just wait for Skyla or Charybdis to stop making the whirlpool, which it only happens a few times a day, but you can sail through safely during that period. Whereas if you just go through Skyla, it's it's an assured number that you will lose. But this one, it's like a black hole, but for sailors. You already see the mountain. It's too late, like an event horizon. It's terrifying. I wonder why that's never been put into another naval work. There's a lot of stories from Arabian Nights or 1001 Nights are reiterated elsewhere, like Aladdin, Sinbad the Sailor. Those ones in particular are extremely popular. Scheherazade is a name that's often dropped because of her being the weaver of the story itself. Yeah, but not the magnetic island. That's really cool, though. Guess we'll keep reading. The next morning, we distinctly perceived the Black Mountain, and the idea we had formed of it made appear still more dreadful and rugged than it really was. About midday, we found ourselves so near it that we began to experience what the pilot had foretold. We saw the nails, and every piece of the iron belonging to the vessel, fly towards the mountain, against which they struck with a horrible noise, impelled by the violence of the magnetic attraction. The vessels then immediately fell to pieces, and sank to the bottom of the sea, which was so deep in this place that we could never discover the bottom by sounding. All of my people perished, but Allah had pity on me, and suffered me to save myself by clinging to a plank, which was driven by the wind directly to the foot of the mountain. I did not sustain the least injury, and had the good fortune to land near a flight of steps which led to the summit of the mountain. I was much rejoiced at the sight of these steps, for there was not the least vestige of land, either to the right or left, upon which I could have set foot to save my life. I returned thanks to Allah, and invoking His holy name began to ascend the mountain. The path was narrow and so steep and difficult that had the wind been at all violent, I must have been blown into the sea. At last I reached the summit without any accident, and entering the dome, I prostrated myself on the ground and offered my thanks to heaven for the favor it had shown me. I passed the night under this dome, and while I was asleep, a venerable old man appeared to me and said, Agib, attend. When you wake, dig up the earth under the certain stars to deliver mankind from many evils. Oh, I missed a line. Under your feet, and you will find a brazen bow with 3 leaden arrows manufactured under certain stars to deliver mankind from many evils which continuously menace them. Shoot these 3 arrows at the statue. The man will be precipitated into the sea, and the horse will fall at your feet. You must bury the horse in the same spot from whence you take the bow and arrows. When you have done this, the sea will begin to be agitated, and will rise as high as the foot of the dome at the top of the mountain. When it shall have risen thus high, you will see a boat come towards the shore with only 1 man in it, holding an oar in each hand. This man will be of brass, but different from the statue that was overthrown. Embark with him without pronouncing the name of Allah, and let him be your guide. In 10 days, he will have carried you into another sea, where you will find the means of returning to your country in safety, provided, as I have already said, you forbear from mentioning the name of Allah during the whole of your voyage. Thus spake the man. As soon as I was awake, I got up much consoled by this vision. I did not fail to do as the old man had directed me. I disinterred the bow and the arrows and shot at the statue. With the 3rd arrow I overthrew the rider, who fell into the sea, while the horse came crashing down to my feet. I buried it in the place where I had found the bow and arrows, and while I was doing this, the sea rose by degrees, till it reached the foot of the dome on the summit of the mountain. I perceived a boat at a distance coming towards me. I offered my thankful prayers to Allah, thus seeing by dream, in every respect fulfilled. The vessel at length approached the land, and I saw in it a man of brass, as had been described. I embarked, and took particular care not to pronounce the name of Allah. I did not even utter a single word. When I had taken my seat, the brazen figure began to row from the mountain. He continued to work without intermission till the 9th day, when I saw some islands, which made me hope I should be free from every danger. The excess of my joy made me forget the direction the old man had given me in my dream. Blessed be Allah, I cried out. Allah be praised. I had hardly pronounced these words when the boat and the brazen man sank to the bottom of the sea. I remained in the water and swam during the rest of the day towards the nearest island. The night which came on was exceedingly dark, and as I no longer knew where I was, I continued swimming at a venture. My strength at the last quite exhausted, and I began to despair of being able to save myself. The wind had much increased, and the mountainous wave threw me upon a flat, shallow shore, and retiring left me there. I immediately made haste to get farther on land for fear another wave should come and carry me back. The first thing I did was to undress and wring the water out of my clothes and spread them upon the sand, which was still warm from the heat of the preceding day. The next morning, as soon as the sun had quite dried my garment, I put it on and began to wander on the shore, trying to discover where I was. I had not walked far before I found my place of refuge to be a small desert island, very pleasant to look upon, and containing many sorts of fruit trees, as well as others, but I observed that it was at a considerable distance from the mainland, and this rather lessened the joy I felt at having escaped from the sea. I nevertheless trusted in heaven to dispose of my fate according to its will. Soon afterwards I discovered a very small vessel, which seemed to come full sail directly from the mainland, with her prow towards the island where I was. Prow? I'm assuming it's a sail or a mast, but we're gonna look it up. Prow. The bow of a ship. Yes. Okay, so it's not the sail or the mast, it's the bow, the front part, the front of the hull itself. Hull being H-U-L-L. Every time I do this, I lose my place. As I had no doubt the crew were coming to anchor here, and as I knew not what sort of people they might be, whether friends or enemies, I determined not to show myself at the first. I therefore climbed into a very thick tree, from whence I could examine the newcomers in safety. The vessel soon sailed up a small creek or bay, where 10 slaves landed with a spade and other implements in their hand for digging up the earth. They went towards the middle of the island, where I observed them stop and turn up the earth for some time, and judging by their movements, I concluded they were lifting up a trap door. They immediately returned to the vessel, from which they landed many sorts of provisions and furniture, and each taking a load, they carried them to the place where they had before dug up the ground. They then seemed to descend, and I conjectured there was a subterraneous building. I saw them once more go to the vessel, and come back with an old man, who brought with him a youth of comely appearance, about 14 or 15 years old. They all descended at the spot where the trap door had been lifted up. When they came out again, they shut down the door, and covered it with earth as before. Then they returned to the creek where the vessel lay, but I observed that the young man did not come back with them. From this I concluded that they had left him in the subterraneous dwelling. This circumstance very much excited my astonishment. The old man and the slaves then embarked, and hoisting the sails, bore away for the mainland. When I found the vessel so far distant that I could not perceive by the crew, I came down from the tree and went directly to the place where I had seen the men dig away the earth. I now worked as they had done, and at last discovered a stone, 2 or 3 feet square. I lifted it up, and found that it concealed the entrance to a flight of stone stairs. I descended and found myself in a large chamber, the floor of which was covered with a carpet. Here were also a sofa and some cushions covered with a rich stuff, and on the sofa sat a young man with a fan in his hand. I perceived all these things by the light of 2 torches, and also noticed fruits and pots of flowers which were near him. At the sight of me, the young man was much alarmed, but to give him courage, I said to him entering, "Whoever you are, fear nothing. A king and the son of a king, I have no intention of doing you any injury. On the contrary, you may esteem it as most fortunate circumstance that I come here to deliver you from this tomb, where you seem to me have been buried alive, though I am at a loss to conjecture the reason. What, however, most embarrasses me, for I will not deny that I have witnessed everything that has happened since you landed on this island, and what I cannot understand is why you have suffered yourself to have been buried here without making any resistance." The young man was much encouraged by the speech, and with a polite gesture requested that I would take a seat near him. As soon as I had complied with his invitation, he said, "Prince, I am about to inform you of a circumstance whose singular nature will very much surprise you. My father is a jeweler, and by his industry and skill in his profession, he has amassed a very large fortune. He has a great number of slaves and factors, who make many voyages for him in his own vessels. He also has correspondents in many courts, who are his customers and purchase of him precious stones and jewels. He had been married a long time without having any children, and one night he dreamed that he should have a son, whose life, however, would be but short. When he awoke, the remembrance of this dream gave him much uneasiness. Sometime after this, my mother informed him that she was about to give him an heir. In due time I was born, to the great joy of all the family. My father observed with the greatest exactness the moment of my birth, and consulted the astrologers concerning my destiny. The wise men answered, 'Your son shall live without any accident or misfortune till he is 15. But he will then run a great risk of losing his life, and he will not escape this danger without much difficulty. Should he be fortunate enough to come safely out of this peril, his life will be preserved for many years.' About this time, too, they added, the equestrian statue of brass, which stands at the top of the Lodestone Mountain, will be overthrown by Prince Agib, the son of Kasib, and will fall into the sea. And the stars also show that 50 days afterwards your son will be killed by that prince." As this prediction agreed with my father's dream, it caused him great anxiety and sorrow. Still, he did not omit to bestow every care on my education, and continued to do so till now, when I am 15 years of age. He was yesterday informed that 10 days ago, the brazen figure was overthrown by the prince, whom I mentioned to you. And this intelligence gave him such alarm and cost him so many tears that he hardly looks like the man he was before. Since first he heard this prediction of the astrologers, my father has tried every means to frustrate my horoscope and preserve my life. long since he took the direct precaution to have this habitation built in order to conceal me for 50 days, he should learn that the statue had been overthrown. It was on this account that, as soon as he knew what had happened 10 days since, he came here for the purpose of concealing me during the 40 days that remain. And he has promised, at the expiration of that time, to come take me back. As for myself, added the youth, I have the greatest hopes, for I do not believe that Prince Agib will come and look for me underground in the midst of a desert island. This, my lord, is all I have to tell you. While the son of the jeweler was relating his history to me, I inwardly laughed at those astrologers who had predicted that I should take away his life, and I felt myself so very unlikely to verify their prediction that directly he had finished speaking I exclaimed with transport, "O dear youth, put thy trust in the goodness of Allah, and fear nothing. Esteem this confinement only as a debt you had to pay, and from this hour you are free. I am delighted at my own good fortune in being cast away here after suffering shipwreck, that I may guard you against those who attempt your life. I will not quit you for the moment during the 40 days which the vain and absurd conjectures of astrologers have caused to appear as time of peril. During this time I will render you every service in my power, and afterwards I will, with your father's permission and yours, take the opportunity of embarking in your vessel in order to return to the continent. And when I am at home, in my own kingdom, I shall never forget the obligation I am under to you, and will endeavor to prove my gratitude by every means in my power." I encouraged him by this discourse, and thus gained his confidence. Fearful of alarming him, I took care not to conceal from him the fact that I was the very person whom he dreaded, nor did I give him the least suspicion of the truth. We conversed about various things till night, and I easily discovered that the young man possessed a very sensible and well-informed mind. We ate together of his store of provisions, which was so abundant that it would have lasted more than 40 days had there been other guests besides myself. We continued to converse together for some time after supper, and then retired to rest. When the youth got up the next morning, I presented him with a basin and some water. He washed himself while I prepared the dinner, which I served up at the proper time. After our repast, I invented a sort of game which was to amuse us, not only during the day, but for those that followed. I prepared the supper in the same way I had done with dinner. We then supped and retired to rest, as on the preceding day. We had sufficiently opportunity to contract a friendship for each other. I perceived that he had an inclination for me, and on my side, I felt for him was so strong that I often said to myself, "The astrologers who have predicted to the father that his son should be slain by my hands were impostors, for it is impossible I can never commit so horrid a crime." In short, we passed 39 days in the pleasantest manner possible in this subterranean habitation. At length the 40th morning arrived. The youth, when he was getting up, said to me, in a transport of joy which he could not restrain, "Behold me now, Prince, on the 40th day, and thanks to Allah and your good company, I am not dead. My father will not fail very soon to acknowledge his obligation, and furnish you with every means and opportunity that you may return to your kingdom. But while we are waiting," added he, "I beg you to have the goodness to warm some water, that I may enjoy a thorough bath. I wish to prepare myself and change my dress in order to receive my father with the greater respect." I put the water on the fire, and when it was sufficiently warm, I filled the bath. The youth stepped in. I washed and rubbed him myself. He then got out, and I went into bed, and I prepared for him. And I threw the cover over him. After he had reposed himself and slept for some time, he said to me, "O Prince, do me a favor and bring me a melon and some sugar. I want to eat something to refresh me." I chose one of the melons that remained and put it on a plate, and as I could not find a knife to cut it, I asked the youth if he knew where I should look for one. "There is one," he replied, "upon the cornice over my head." What a story. It's like Oedipus, where the oracles are always right, and you do everything in your power to avoid it, and by doing that, you cause the problem itself. "There is one," he replied, "upon the cornice over my head." I looked up and perceived one there, but I overreached myself in endeavoring to get it, and at the very moment I had it in my hand. My foot by some means got so entangled in the covering of the bed that I unfortunately fell down on the young man and pierced him in the heart with a knife. In an instant he was dead. At this sight I wept most bitterly. I beat my head and breast, I tore my habit, and threw myself on the ground in grief and despair. Alas, I cried, only a few hours more and he would have been free from the danger against which he sought an asylum, and at the very moment when I thought the peril past, I am become the assassin. I myself fulfilled the prediction, but I ask thy pardon, O Lord, I added, raising my head and hands towards heaven. And if I am guilty of this death, I desire to live no longer. After this misfortune, death would have been very acceptable to me, and I should have met it without dread. But we are seldom afflicted with evil or blessed with good fortune at the very moment we make desire of either. Remembering after a time that all my tears and sorrow could not restore the youth to life, and that, as the 40 days were now concluded, I should be surprised by the father, I went out of the subterraneous dwelling and ascended to the top of the stairs. I replaced the large stone over the entrance and covered it with earth. Scarcely had I finished my task when, looking towards the mainland, I perceived the vessel which was coming for the young man. Meditating what plan I should pursue, I said to myself, if I let them see me, the old man will probably seize me, and order his slaves to kill me when he discovers that his son has been murdered. Whatever I could allege in my own justification would never persuade him of my innocence. It is surely better, then, to withdraw myself from his sight, while I have the power rather than expose myself to his resentment. Near the subterraneous cavern, there was a large tree, thick foliage of which seemed to offer a secure retreat. I immediately climbed into this tree, and had hardly placed myself as to not be seen when I observed the vessel come to land in the same place where it had before anchored. The old man and the slaves instantly came on shore, and approached the subterraneous dwelling in a manner that showed they had some hopes of a good result. But when they saw that the ground had lately been disturbed, they changed color, especially the old man. Then they lifted up the stone, and descended the stairs. They called the young man by his name, but no answer was returned. This redoubled their anxiety. They sought him, and at last found him stretched on his couch, with a knife through his heart, for I had not had the courage to draw it out. At this mournful sight, they uttered such lamentable cries that my tears flowed afresh. The old man fainted with horror. The slaves brought him out in their arms, that he might feel the air, and placed him at the foot of the very tree in which I was. Notwithstanding all their efforts to recover him, the unfortunate father remained so long in an insensible state that they more than once despaired of his life. It's like, it's not... Oedipus is comical in, like, a certain context because of just, like, the poor bastard that he is. This one's, like... It's comedic because it's almost slapstick because he tripped in the sheets of the bed and knocked the knife into the kid's heart. Like how? The calendar stories have just been really ridiculous. The first one was there's the two kingdoms with brother kings and their sons who were really good friends, and Calendar goes to hang out with his cousin, and he's like, you gotta follow me, but you gotta promise me you're not gonna ask what this is about. And they go into a room, or they go to the mausoleum, and the cousin is like, he's got this lady with him, and the Calendar doesn't know who this lady is because he never met her, but he's like, wow, she's really pretty. And then the cousin goes into the mausoleum, and eventually it's revealed that that woman is Prince's sister, and so it's an incestuous relationship that the uncle of the Calendar had condemned, obviously. and they were smited or smote, I don't know the term, by divine fire. It doesn't really go into great detail on what occurred, but they died in a bed, and it appeared like their corpses were charred and pulled out of a fire, not burnt to a crisp. So gruesome in its own right, but these stories have just been wild. A little more adventurous than the three old men recounting their tales, too. First genie. And then there's the fisherman and the genie. That one was interesting. The multicolored fish thing was kind of strange. But that was unique in its own right as well. Oh, and it mentioned Persians and fire breathers, so it was the four colors of fish. There was ones transformed into Muslims, to Jews, to Christians, and then Persians was the fourth category, or fire worshippers. And what that colloquially means is Zoroastrian, I think. Unless I'm getting my mythology mixed up. Zoroastrianism popped up at a similar time as the Abrahamic religions, and it was monotheistic in its own right. It had angels that were predominant figures, similar to how Catholics have saints of, high privileges, or LDS Mormons, if you're familiar with the LDS Church, how they held Moroni in great accord. There is an angel in Zoroastrianism who is shaped in the way of a peacock. Because of the parallels between the creation myths of Zoroastrianism. Oh wait, is that Zoroastrianism, or is that? I'm reciting Yazidism, I think. Yeah, I'm totally off. I think. I gotta go over my Persian mythology. Who worships the peacock god? Peacock angel. I know it exists. I'm gonna take a short break. Feel free to look it up while I'm gone. check. Oh, we're back. Hello again. Alright. Where were we? The old man was just... he fainted and is now laying under the tree where the third calendar is. So where were we in the line? Once just been out and standing on the efforts to the worship. He at length recovered from the long fainting fit. The slaves then went down and brought up the body of his son, clothed in the poor youth's finest garments. As soon as the grave which they made was ready, they put the body in, supported by the two slaves, with his face bathed in tears. Back at 10:01. Back at 10:01. 1001. Oh, 1001 nights. I get it. This melancholy duty done, the furniture and remainder of the provisions were brought on board the vessel. The old man, overcome with sorrow and unable to walk alone, was carried to the vessel in a sort of litter by the slaves, and they immediately put to sea. They were soon at a considerable distance from the island, and I lost sight of them. I now remained alone in the island, and passed the following night in the subterraneous dwelling, which had not been again shut up, and the next day I took a survey of the whole island, resting in the pleasantest spots whenever I felt weary. Pleasantest spots, yes, that is how it is written. I passed the whole month in this solitary manner. At the end of that time I perceived that the sea retired considerably, that the island appeared to become larger, and that the distance from the mainland visibly decreased. In truth, the water narrowed so much that there was only now a small channel between me and the continent, and I passed over the mainland without going deeper than the middle of my leg. And then I walked so far on the flat sand that I was greatly fatigued. At last I reached firmer ground, and had left the sea at a considerable distance behind me, when I saw in the distance something that appeared like a large tree. A large fire. At this I was so much rejoiced, for here, said I to myself, I shall certainly find some people, as a fire cannot light itself. But as I came nearer, I found I was myself mistaken in my conjecture, and discovered that what I had taken for a fire was a sort of castle of red copper, from which the rays of the sun were reflected in such a manner that it seemed all flames. I stopped near this castle and sat down, partly to admire the beauty of the building, and partly to rest myself. I had not yet become tired of contemplating this magnificent house, when I perceived 10 handsome young men who came out, as it appeared to me, for the purpose of walking. But it struck me as a very surprising circumstance that they were all blind of the right eye. An old man, of rather tall stature and very venerable appearance, accompanied them. I was very much astonished at this meeting. At one time, so many people who were all not only blind of one but the same eye. While I was endeavoring to conjecture in my own mind for what purpose or by what accident they were all thus collected together, they accosted me and showed signs of great joy at my appearance. After the first greetings had passed, they inquired of me what brought me here. I told them that my history was rather long, but added that, if they would take the trouble to sit down, I would afford them the satisfaction they wished by telling my adventures. They seated themselves, and I related them everything that had happened to me, from the moment I had left my own kingdom till that instant. This narration greatly excited their surprise. When I had finished my story, they entreated me to come with them into the castle. I accepted their offer, and we entered the building together. After passing through a long suite of halls, antechambers, saloons, and cabinets, all very handsomely furnished, we came at length to a large and magnificent apartment, where there were 10 small blue sofas, placed in a circle, but separate from each other. These served both as seats for repose during the day, and also as beds to sleep upon in the night. In the midst of the circle, there was another sofa, less raised than the others, but of the same color, upon which sat an old man, of whom I have spoken, while the young men seated themselves upon the surrounding 10. As each sofa only held one person, one young man said to me, "Friend, sit down upon the carpet in the center of the room, and seek not to know anything that regards us, nor the reason why we are all blind in the right eye. Be satisfied with what you see, and do not seek to gratify any curiosity you may feel." The old man did not remain long seated. He rose presently and went out, but very soon returned, bringing with him supper for the 10 young men, to each of whom he distributed a certain portion. He gave me mine in the same way, and like the rest, I ate my share apart. As soon as the repast was finished, the old man presented to each of us a cup of wine. My history appeared to these men so extraordinary that they made me repeat it when supper was over. This afterwards led to a conversation, which lasted the greater part of the night. One of the young men now observed that it was late, and said to the old one, "You see that it is time to retire to rest, and yet you do not bring us what we require for discharge of our duty." At this the old man got up and went into a cabinet, from whence he brought upon his head, one after the other, 10 basins, all covered with blue stuff. He placed one of these, with a torch, before each of the young men. They uncovered their bases, which contained some ashes, some charcoal in the powder, and some lamp black. Lamp black? What's lamp black? Lamp black. A finely powdered black soot, deposited in complete combustion of carbonaceous materials and used chiefly as a pigment. Okay, so like charcoal, but powdery. Okay. Where was I? Oh. They mixed all these ingredients together and began to rub them over their faces and smear their countenances until their appearance was very frightful. After they had blacked themselves over in this manner, they began to weep, to make great lamentations, and to beat themselves on the head and breast, while they cried out continually, "Behold the consequences of our idleness and debauchery." They passed almost the whole night in this strange occupation. At last they ceased their lamentations, and the old man brought them some water, in which they washed their faces and hands. They took off their dresses, which were much torn, and put on others, and no one would have supposed they had been engaged in the extraordinary proceedings which I had witnessed. Judge what were my feelings during all this period. I was tempted 1,000 times to break the silence which they had imposed upon me, and to ask them the questions, and very amazement prevented me from getting any rest during the remainder of the night. The following morning, as soon as we were up, we went out to take the air, and I then said to my companions, "I must inform you, gentlemen, that I retract the promise you extorted from me last night, as I can no longer observe it. You are a wise man, and you have given me sufficient reason to believe that you possess an enlarged understanding. Yet at the same time, I have seen you do things which none but madmen would be guilty of. Whatever misfortune my inquiry may bring upon me, I cannot refrain from asking for what reason you daubed your faces with ashes, charcoal, and black paint, and how you have each lost an eye. There must be some very singular cause for all of this. I entreat you, therefore, to satisfy my curiosity." Notwithstanding the urgency of my request, they only answered that I was inquiring about things that did not concern me, that I had no interest in their actions, and that I must remain content. We passed the day in converse upon different subjects. When night approached, we supped separately as before. The old man again brought the blue basins, with the contents of which the others anointed themselves. Then they wept, beat themselves, and exclaimed, "Behold the consequences of our idleness and debauchery." The next night, and on the third night also, they did the same thing. I could at last no longer resist my curiosity, and I very seriously entreated them to satisfy me, or to inform me by what road I could return to my kingdom, for I told them it was impossible that I could remain any longer with them, and every night be witness to the extraordinary sight I beheld, if I was not permitted to know the causes that produced it. One of the young men thus answered me, in the name of the rest, "Do not be astonished at what we do in your presence. If we have not hitherto yielded to you your entreaties, it has been entirely out of friendship for you, and to spare you anguish of being yourself reduced to the state in which you see us. If you wish to share our unhappy fate, you have only to speak, and we will tell you what you wish to know." I told them I was determined to be satisfied at all risks. "Once more," resumed the same young man who had spoken, "we advise you to restrain your curiosity, for it will cost you the sight of your right eye." "I care not," I answered, "and I declare to you that if this misfortune does happen, I shall not consider you as the cause of it, but shall lay the blame entirely on myself." Again he represented to me that, when I should have lost my eye, I must not expect to remain with them, even if I had thought of doing so, for their number was complete and could not be increased. I told them that it would be satisfaction to me to continue to dwell among such agreeable men as they appeared to be, but still, if separation were necessary, I would submit to it. Since whatever might be the consequence, I was determined that my curiosity should be gratified. The 10 young men, seeing that I was not to be shaken in my resolution, took a sheep and killed it. After they had taken off the skin, they gave me a knife they had made use of, and said, "Take this knife. It will serve you for an occasion that will presently arise. We are going to sew you up in this skin, in which you must be entirely concealed. We shall then retire and leave you in this place. Soon afterwards, a bird of most enormous size, which they called a roc, will appear in the air, and taking you for a sheep, it will swoop down upon you and lift you up to the clouds, but let this not alarm you. The bird will soon return with his prey towards the earth, and will lay you down upon the top of a mountain. As soon as you feel yourself upon the ground, rip open the skin with the knife and set yourself free. On seeing you, the roc will be alarmed. And fly away, leaving you at liberty. Tarry not in that place, But go on until you arrive at a castle of enormous magnitude, entirely covered with plates of gold, set with large emeralds and other precious stones. Go to the gate, which is always open, and enter. All of us who are here have been in that castle, but we will tell you nothing of what we saw, nor will we relate what happened to us there, as you will learn everything yourself. The only thing we can tell you is that our sojourn in that palace cost each of us a right eye, and that the penance you have seen us perform, we are obliged to undergo in consequence of our having been there. The particular history of each of us is full of wonderful adventures. It would make a great book. It would make a large book. But we cannot now tell you more. When the young man had finished speaking, I wrapped myself up in the sheepskin and took the knife which they gave me. After they had taken the trouble to sew me up in the skin, they left me, and retired into their apartment. It was not long before the rock which they had mentioned made its appearance. It swooped down upon me, took me up in its talons as if I were a sheep, and carried me to the summit of a mountain. When I perceived that I was upon the ground, I did not fail to make use of my knife. I ripped open the skin, threw it off, and appeared before the rock, which flew away the instant it saw me. This rock is a white bird of enormous size. Its strength is such that it can lift up elephants from the ground and carry them to the top of mountains, where it devours them. My impatience to arrive at the castle was such that I lost not an instant in the proceeding thither. Indeed, I made so much haste that I reached it in less than half a day. If I may add that I found it much more magnificent than it had been described. The gate was open, and I entered a square court of vast extent. It contained 99 doors, made of sandalwood, and that of the aloe tree, and one, the 100th door, was of gold. Besides all these, there were entrances to many magnificent staircases, which led to the upper apartments, and some others which I did not then see. The 100 doors I have mentioned formed the entrances either into gardens, or into storerooms filled with riches, or into some other apartments which contained objects most surprising to behold. Opposite to me I saw an open door, through which the letters are getting worse, the spots that are missing from it. They're, that looks completely like an N. There's no tail on the H, sadly. Under stores, I have been found an interesting garden and a store filled with riches or some other apartments which contained objects most surprising to behold. Okay. Opposite me, I saw an open door, through which I entered into a large saloon, where 40 young ladies were sitting. Their beauty was so perfect that the imagination cannot conceive anything beyond it. They were all magnificently dressed, and as soon as they perceived me, they rose, and without waiting for my salutation, they called out with an appearance of joy, "Welcome, my brave lord, you are welcome." And one of them, speaking for the rest, said, we have a long time expected a person like you. Your manner sufficiently shows that you possess all good qualities we could wish, and we hope that you will not find our company disagreeable or unworthy of you." After much resistance on my part, they persuaded me to sit down on a seat more raised than those on which they sat, and when I showed embarrassment at this distinction, they said, "It is your right. From this moment you are our lord, our master, and our judge. We are your slaves, and ready to obey your commands." Nothing in the world could have astonished me more than the desire and eagerness these ladies professed to render me every possible service. One brought me warm water to wash my feet, another poured perfume water over my hands. Some came with a complete change of apparel for me. Some of the ladies served up a delicious repast, while others stood before me with glasses in their hands, ready to pour out the most delicious wine. Everything was done without confusion, and in such admirable order and such a pleasant way that I was quite charmed. I ate and drank, and when I had finished, all the ladies placed themselves around me and asked me to relate the circumstances of my journey. I gave them the full account of my adventures, and my story lasted till nightfall. Then some of the 40 ladies who were seated nearest to me stayed to converse with me, while others, observing it was night, went out to seek for lights. They returned with a prodigious number that produced almost the brilliance of day, but they were arranged with so much symmetry and taste that we could hardly wish for the return of daylight. Some of the ladies covered the tables with dried fruits and sweetmeats of every kind. They also furnished the sideboards with many sorts of wine and sherbet, while other of the ladies came with several musical instruments. When everything was ready, they invited me to sit down to table. The ladies bore me company, and we remained there a considerable time. Those who entertained us with music sang to the sound of their instruments, thus producing a delightful concert. The rest began to dance, moving in pairs, one after the other, in the most graceful and elegant manner possible. It was then past midnight before all these amusements were concluded. One of the ladies then addressing me said, "You are fatigued with the distance you have come today, and it is time for you should take some repose. Your apartment is prepared." And they conducted me to the magnificent apartment. The other ladies then left me there and retired. I had hardly finished dressing myself in the morning before the ladies came to my apartment. They were so splendidly adorned as on the preceding day. They saluted me and conducted me to a bath, but in a different manner, and when I had bathed, they brought me another dress, still more magnificent than the first. My laptop audio is going to turn off, sir. BRB. Fair enough. I'm going to figure out something on the stream right now. Problem with this large of a book is that it's very unwieldy. It's not the worst thing, but be happy when we pick up a book that is not so ridiculous in size. Well, for the other person here, unless this is still Plinka and the other person just tuned out, we are reading the Arabian Nights, or 1001 Nights, depending on the translation. Currently, we are in the tale of the third calendar of the three. Right now, calendars are recounting their tales so as to spare their lives because they entered a abode in which three sisters made it clear that the only rule was to not ask any question, and if they did, they would be punished. They didn't say that there would be a punishment, but they just asked for that. And then they had slaves come out and threaten to behead every individual that came. Oh, you're back. Hello again. Just doing a recounting of the calendars, but I have a feeling that I was recounting it to nobody. Figured out my thing with the stream, so no issue there. I think one thing I've noticed is that the stories are starting to tend to get a little longer within the Arabian Nights. Not just in which ones, like how long we stay in a particular story, but the length of the or the time given for each character within a story. We probably won't make Return to the Porter. I don't think that would make sense in terms of like what's been covered, but I wonder if we'll go over the Sultan and the Vizier and the eunuch. I'd love if they went over the story of a eunuch. Why do people become eunuchs? I know it's like generally a slave class, like it's an option instead of being outright killed to become a eunuch. But there's also people who volunteer for it, so I don't know. But we'll see if we get that far in the story and they decide that they want to tell the eunuch's tale. I'd be very curious to read it. Where was I? Dance apartment's prepared. He retired. They bathed. In short, madam, not to tire you by repeating the same thing over again, I may tell you at once that I passed a whole year with these 40 ladies, and that during the whole of the time the pleasures of life I led were not marred by the least uneasiness or disquietude. I was therefore greatly surprised when, at the end of the year, 40 ladies, instead of presenting themselves to me in their accustomed good spirits, one morning instead, entered my apartment with their countenances bathed in tears. Each of them came and concerned me and said, "Adieu, dear prince, adieu. We are now compelled to leave you." Why they were obliged to leave me, "In the name of Allah, you beautiful ladies," I exclaimed, "tell me, I beseech you, is it in my power to console you, or will my aid and assistance prove useless?" Instead of answering my question directly, they said, "Would to God we have never seen or known you. Many men have done us the honor of visiting us before you came, but no one possessed the elegance, the gentleness, the power of pleasing, the merit we find in you, nor do we know how we shall be able to live without you." And as they said this, their tears flowed afresh. "Amiable ladies," I cried, "do not, I beg you, keep me any longer in suspense, but tell me the cause of your sorrow." "Alas," answered they, "what can it be that afflicts us but the necessity of separating from you? Perhaps we shall never meet again, yet still, if you really wish it, and have sufficient command over yourself to observe the conditions, it is not absolutely impossible we may return to you." "In truth," I replied, "ladies, I do not at all understand what you mean. I conjure you to speak more openly." "Well then," said one of them, "to satisfy you, we must inform you we are all princesses and daughters of kings. You have seen what manner of life we lead here, but at the end of each year we are compelled to absent ourselves for 40 days, to fulfill some duties which may not be left undone, but the nature of which we are not at liberty to reveal. After this period we again return to this castle. Yesterday the year ended, and today we must leave you. This is the great cause of our affliction. Before we go, we will give you the keys of the whole palace, and particularly of the 100 doors, within which you will find ample room to gratify your curiosity and amuse your solitude during our absence. But for your own sake, and for our particular interest, we entreat you to keep away from the golden door. If you open it, we shall never see you again, and we fear unless you should increases our sorrow. We hope you will profit by the advice we have given you. Your response, your happiness, nay, your life depends on it. Therefore be careful. If you indiscreetly yield to your curiosity, you also do as much injury. We conjure, therefore, not to be guilty of this fault, but to let us have the joy of finding you here at the end of 40 days. We would take the key of the golden door with us, but it would be an offense to a prince like yourself to doubt your circumspection and discretion. This is very similar to a story in Grimm's fairy tales. If you've ever read Bluebeard, it's like the one story that Disney hasn't got to yet. They probably never will. But there is a wealthy, handsome gentleman called Bluebeard, because his beard is blue. And he, has women who approach him who try and woo him to court him to be his wife, and it's very similar where he's like, all right, you now have access to my entire mansion except for one door. You cannot open the one door, and if you do, there's repercussions. And whenever they enter into the room, because they inevitably do, because humans are horribly curious creatures, they find a room full of bodies that are preserved in the room because it's magic. But they are all killed because once they enter there, Bluebeard is compelled to murder them. I don't think that's the exact way this story is going. Like, I don't think the 40 princesses are going to be compelled to kill the prince, but it's the concept of, can you trust, someone not to go in a room after you tell them they have access to it? Don't do it. Don't go in it. I don't know. We'll see. At this speech, I was greatly affected. I made them understand that their absence would cause me such pain, and thanked them very much for the good advice they gave me. I assured them that I would profit by it, and would perform things much more difficult, if any sacrifice might procure me the happiness of passing the remainder of my life with the ladies of such rare and extraordinary merit. We took a most tender leave of one another. I embraced them all, and they departed from the castle, in which I remained quite alone. The delight of their company, our sumptuous mode of life, and the concerts and various amusements with which the ladies had livened my stay, had so entirely engrossed my time during the year that I had not had the least opportunity, nor indeed inclination, to examine the wonders of this enchanted palace. I had not even paid any attention to the multitude of extraordinary objects which were continually before my eyes. So much had I been enchanted by the charms and accomplishments of the ladies, and the pleasure I felt at finding them always employed in endeavoring to amuse me. I was very sorrowful at their departure, and although their absence was to last only 40 days, the time during which I was to be deprived of their society, seemed to me an age, an era, a length of time. I determined in my own mind to observe the advice they had given me, not to open the golden door, but as I was permitted, with that one exception, to satisfy my curiosity. I took the keys belonging to the other apartments, which were regularly arranged, and opened the first door. I entered a fruit garden, to which I thought nothing in the world was comparable, not even that paradise of which our religion promises us the enjoyment after death. The admirable order and arrangement in which the trees were disposed, the abundance and variety of fruits, many of which were kinds unknown to me, together with their freshness and beauty, and the elegant neatness apparent in every spot, filled me with astonishment. Nor must I neglect to inform you that this delightful garden was watered in a most singular manner. Small channels, cut out with great art and regularity, and of different sizes, conveyed the water in great abundance to the roots of some trees, which required a liberal supply to make them send forth their first leaves and flowers, while others, whose fruit were already set, received a smaller quantity of moisture. Those whose fruit was much swelled had still less, while a fourth spot, on which the fruit had come to maturity, had what was just sufficient to ripen them. The size also, which all the fruits attained, very much exceeded that which we are accustomed to observe in our gardens. These channels that conducted the water to the trees on which the fruit was ripe had barely enough water to preserve it in the same state without decaying it. This is just aquaponics. He's going nuts for aquaponics. I could not grow weary of examining and admiring this beautiful spot. I should have never left it, if I had not, from the beginning, conceived a still higher idea of the things which I had not yet seen. I returned with my mind full of wonders I had beheld. I then closed the first door and opened the next. Instead of a fruit garden, I now discovered a flower garden, which was not in its kind and less singular. It contained a spacious parterre. I don't know what a parterre is. Parterre. An ornamental garden with paths between the beds, a part of the main floor of a theater that is behind the I think it's the first meaning. An ornamental garden with paths between the beds. Okay. Not watered so abundantly as the first garden, but with greater skill and management, for each flower received just the amount of irrigation it required. The roses, the jessamine, the violet, the narcissus, the hyacinth, the anemone, and the tulip, the anunculus, the carnation, the lily, and an infinity of other flowers, which in other places bloom at various times, came all into flower at once in this spot. And nothing could be softer than the air in this garden. On opening the third door, I discovered a very large aviary. It was paved with marble of different colors, and of the finest and rarest sort. The cages were of sandalwood and aloes, and contained a great number of nightingales, goldfinches, canaries, larks, and other birds, whose notes were sweeter and more melodious than any I had ever heard. The vases which contained their food and water were of jasper, or of the most valuable agate. Agate? Agate? I don't know how to pronounce that one, but I know it's a rock. It's a bluish in color. Similar to malachite, if you know what that looks like, but blue. The vases which the aviary also was kept with the greatest neatness, and from its vast extent I conceived that not less than 100 persons would be necessary to maintain it in perfection in which it appeared, and yet I could see no one, either here or in the other gardens, nor did I observe a single noxious weed, nor the least superfluous thing that could offend the sight. The sun had already set, and I retired much delighted with the warbling of the multitude of birds, which were flying about in search of commodious resting places where to perch and enjoy the repose of the night. I went back to my apartment, and determined to open all the other doors except the 100th on the succeeding days. The next day I did not fail to go to the fourth door and open it. But if the sights which I had seen on the foregoing days had surprised me, what I now beheld put me in ecstasy. I first entered a large court, surrounded by a building of very singular sort of architecture, of which, to avoid being very prolix, I will not give you a description. What? Excuse me. This is reminiscent to me of Lovecraft's writings, where it's like I can't describe it to you because it's beyond comprehension. It's impossible to describe. So I'm not even gonna try. It's like it's not a cop out because that was never that wasn't a very common concept in a lot of Western literature. Now I can see it was done in this. Lovecraft actually was an avid consumer of 1001 Nights. It was the basis for his character, the Mad Arab, um, and the Necronomicon, which is a book written by that one man, um, similar in size to the Arabian Nights, because it's a gigantic book. I wonder if he got the idea from there of omitting how glorious something can be. Because that wasn't a common practice, actually. Thinking to books like Dante's Inferno, where they gave very descript and explicit prose to their ideas of the afterlife. Because in the Bible, there isn't really mention of what hell is like. The descriptions are meager, to say the least, when compared to Dante's Inferno. A lot of the concepts we have for what hell is like actually come from Dante's Inferno, which isn't technically canon if you're Protestant, but if you are Catholic, it is considered part of the religious canon. Yeah, but everything, that and Dante's Purgatorio, and then I forget the term for heaven. But it's the three-parter, and he describes heaven in abundantly increasing layers of light. It becomes blindingly light the closer you become to God. Like the more holy you were as a person, the closer you emanate towards God, and the brighter it is. He uses the planets as a analogy for the closeness to God. But there was always a attempt to describe things in enough detail to at least imagine them. And the only two times I can think of that being departed from are in Lovecraft's mythology and now the Arabian Nights. We've been reading the same story now for almost 3 hours. I mean, we were in the second calendars, but we're almost done with it. The third calendar story's going a long time. I think I gotta call it. How many more pages we got in this one? This one's not ending for a while. I know I started earlier, but I think I'm gonna end earlier too. I'm not in the mode for Friday streams yet. Maybe next week I'll stay on a little longer, but I made it about 3 hours again, so I'm happy with that. But I think I'm a sign off. Of course, we will end on a poem of Keats, but I'm Arabian Nights out. We're gotta get another book to read along with this. Maybe switch back and forth between them, but I don't know. This one's big. This one's long. Not feeling very good. You aren't feeling very good? I'm sorry to hear that. Like a sickness-wise? Or just not sleeping well? Mm. This is supposed to be a collection of his best works. It's exceedingly short when you look only at his, what would you call them? Lyric poems. But it seems like his narrative poems are what take the breadth of his size of his work. Feeling when you were reading in a moving car. Oh, like car sickness, I think. I don't read a lot in the car. I tend to be the one driving. But I've been car sick before. Yeah, okay. Something like that. And a great feeling. Sorry to hear that. Yeah, I don't know what could be causing it because you're not reading either. You're just listening to it, and I assume doing something like studying or something else, and I'm just in the background. Well, I hope that it goes away. Get some rest so that it does not continue. We shall end on the note of Where's the Poet by John Keats. Where's the poet? Show him, muses nine, that I may know him. 'Tis the man who with a man is an equal, be he king or poorest of the beggar clan, or any other wondrous thing. And man may be twixt ape and Plato. 'Tis the man who with a bird, wren or eagle, finds his way to all its instincts. He hath heard the lion's roaring and can tell when his horny throat expresseth, and to him the tiger's yell comes articulate and presseth on his ear like a mother tongue. Lyric poems are so much shorter than Ode to a Nightingale and Ode to Grecian Urn that it feels like they end too quickly. But they're beautiful. Well, we'll return Monday. It's been a fun 3 hours of reading. Signing off. Thank you for sticking around as long as you did. I hope that you feel better. And I will see you next time.